Okay, so we'll start. Bienvenue, welcome. And I just want to go over the program rapidly, and then I'll start my introduction. So I'll be the first one to speak and present the program briefly. Then Emilie Mitran, who is next to me, will talk about today's workshop, which is our first workshop. And I will talk about it in a series of many workshops leading to this major conference in Paris in 2026. Then we'll have Francesca Genesio on my left, who will be speaking next on Mazzei, Filippo Mazzei. Then we'll have a short break. And then we'll hear Steve Sarson, who is there, who will talk about the Declaration of Independence from a historical perspective in the Declaration. And then we'll have Gérard Hugues, who is professor here at Aix, who will talk about leaving a revolution or putting an end to a revolution through a constitution. And he will speak English. And on the program, the title is in French, but his presentation will be in English. And then we'll have concluding thoughts by Patrick Sparrow, director and librarian of the American Philosophical Society, who flew all the way from Philadelphia for just one afternoon. So here, sorry to say that, but to us Europeans, it's very American. And I mean it as a compliment. There is no limit to distance. So thank you so much, Patrick, for being with us physically. Now we have to specify. So, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, good. So, as I was saying, welcome to Aix-en-Provence and to this first workshop of our program called America 2026. I'll go back to that acronym or name in a minute. And I wish to warmly thank, most of all, Emilie. She's not on the screen, but she will later, for organizing this event. It's been wonderful working with you, Emilie, and you're a very discreet person, but very efficient. She never calls me when there is a problem. She just solves it. So. Then Sébastien Lefebvre, who is not with us, but who is the director of the LERMA, that is the research center hosting us this afternoon. And Laurence Luxterrit, who is here with us, who heads the program called Britaix 1718 for including this workshop into their seminar program. And I'm very thankful, merci beaucoup, because the idea of this program is to go from one place to the other and hopefully, possibly being most welcomed by colleagues who work on the American Revolution or on the 18th century, who are there wherever we go. And as my Aix-en-Provence colleagues know, I seize every opportunity to come here, and that was another one. Because I'm saying that because I was here last week. And I also want to thank Patrick Sparrow for coming all the way from Philadelphia, as I was saying, and therefore showing his greatly appreciated involvement and support for our work, and possibly his love of France and possibly his love of Southern France. And I thank you, all of you, for following us online. America 2026 is an acronym, as we absolutely need one to apply for grants and various sources of financial support here in France. And it has to be recognizable in the research landscape, or research-scape, shall we say. It was found by Emilie. I told you she does everything. And that was great. One day, spontaneously, she emailed me acronyms. It was 6 months ago. I didn't pay much attention. I said, oh, good idea. And then I went back to them 2 months later, and they were really great. And we chose that one for the moment, of course, because it can be, like many other things, it can be discussed until we apply for the formal French grant. But because in French, it sounds really good because America is recognizable. And in French, it's Amérique, Révolution, Indépendance, Commémoration, and Espace Atlantique. So it's things that I think are recognizable in most European languages. And it is pronounceable. And clearly, because you have to find an acronym that that stimulates a catchphrase, or something that everybody, because in 6 months from now, we wanted everybody in France and in the US and in our European partners said, oh yes, America 2026, I know what it is. So now what I want to do is talk about you, our partners, and then explain what our original preliminary objectives are, at least as of today. So what has been really wonderful to me was that everyone I wrote in the past year or so about the program not only answered me right away, but with real enthusiasm. Therefore, we have a long list of individual and institutional partners in France, in Europe, and in the United States, even before starting. And this list is growing as I am still contacting fellow scholars, and I count on all of you to contact other scholars wherever you are who might be interested in joining us. Of course, this is not a marriage. It doesn't mean we have to stay 5 years together. People can join us just for an event. That's absolutely fine to me. So in France, apart from my own university, Paris 8, which is located north of Paris in Saint-Denis, and that of Aix-Marseille, where we are, I'd like to mention Lyon, where we have Steve Sarson, who is here with us, and Agnès Delahaye, who is online, Strasbourg, with Guylain Potriquet, Toulouse, with Françoise Coste, Poitiers, Élodie Perrol, Rouen, Karine Lunissi, Nantes, Eric Schnackenbourg, Pau also, with Olivier Caporossi, and Nanterre, which is in our numbering system, Paris 10, or used to be Paris 10, Caroline Galland and Agnès Trouillet, who is here with us. In Germany, our partners are the Obama Institute for Transnational Studies at Mainz, and Thorsten, I've seen you on the list, it's director, so thank you for being here. And the Bavarian American Academy in Munich, which will host our second meeting, because our second meeting will be in Germany in July 2022. But also the University of Bayreuth with Suzanne Larenist, as well as Nelly Salawish, who I see right in front of me, a former fellow of the Obama Institute, who's been very supportive from the very beginning, even translating documents into German. Merci. Danke. She said something very interesting. She said, well, you want to make it European, so it has to be in various languages. And this is it. This is it. And in Italy, I'd like to thank Manuela Albertone and Eduardo Tortarlo, who have seen on the list, and the department, more globally, the Department of History at the University of Turin. And in the Netherlands, I've been in contact with Damien Pargas and Lauren Lauret at Leiden. That's also one of our contacts. In the United States, our partners are the prestigious American Philosophical Society, the David Center for the Study of the American Revolution, headed by Brendan McConville, the McNeil Center, directed by Emma Hart. I don't know if Emma is here, but she said she might be with us, all in Philadelphia. But also, we also have Mount Vernon and Monticello, both in Virginia, institutions with which I've worked in the past. And also the Carolina Low Country and Atlantic World Program in Charleston, South Carolina. But I have also mentioned our program to various historical societies, for example, the French Colonial Historical Society or the Consortium on the Revolutionary Era, as well as the Revolutionary Age Group. And I see Patrick Griffin, I've seen you on the list. Yes, you're on the list. And Frank Colliano, you're on the list too. So thank you for being with us. Also, who have shown great enthusiasm for our program. And lately, I've been in contact with François Furstenberg at Johns Hopkins University, who's been very supportive and will join our group. So I hope you're impressed because I would be if I were you. So our objectives are to place in a comparative perspective, that is European, French, German, Italian, and Dutch for the moment, but I'd very much like to include Spain, as there is a renewed interest on Spain and the American Revolution or the war for US independence. And of course, transatlantic. To study both the impact of the American Revolution at the time, but also its place in the historiography proper to each country. And also importantly, in languages other than English. For example, I don't read German, but I would love to know, what books are published in German, for example, on the American Revolution. So the linguistic part of it is important to me. And this is a way for us to leave the sacrosanct and somewhat exclusive comparison of the American and French revolutions and early Franco-American relations to see how France compares to other Western European nations in its contemporaneous view of the American Revolution and in its historiography of the event since then. But my idea is not to discard this Franco-American revolutionary comparison approach, as it has been and still is very instructive. And it can be done in multiple new ways, as Emilie, Francesca, and Gerard will show us today. But rather, to reflect comparatively on its centrality in the French historiography of the American Revolution. In other words, why has it been the main paradigm in France? And what are the other paradigms elsewhere in continental Europe, as in Italy, Germany, or the Netherlands? Additionally, we cannot study, it seems to me, or commemorate the American Revolution without our North American peers. So another objective is to see whether, and if so, how, the reverberation of recent historiographical developments in the United States has influenced continental European historiographies, and at what pace. Perhaps it needs to be recalled that in 1976, the American Revolution was also studied and commemorated in conferences and special issues of journals in France. Commemorating the American Revolution, the independence of the United States, and 1776 has not been just an American affair, and it's obviously very important to us. Conversely, in the context of the internationalization of US history, our North American colleagues will surely be interested in knowing what is being done in terms of commemorations and historical production on this side of the Atlantic. But our objectives are not solely academic. We also wish to present the American Revolution and our work to the largest possible public. This could be through a rich website with contributions from European and North American scholars, an exhibit on the American Revolution in Europe, for instance, at the Musée Franco-Américain de Blérancourt, located north of Paris, and with which I've worked on a previous 1776 conference back in 2016. To people who don't know Blérancourt, it's a place associated with Saint-Just, the revolutionary Saint-Just. So when you go there, they'll show you Saint-Just's home. But actually, there is a museum on Franco-American relations there. That's most important to us. But I've been thinking also of the Musée du Nouveau Monde in La Rochelle as a possible institutional partner. And we can also examine a traveling exhibit, at least in continental Europe. And with the Brexit now, I always say continental Europe to be safe. This program will eventually lead to a major anniversary conference in Paris at the new campus Condorcet. I say new in 2021, but in 2026, it won't be that new, but still. And possibly also in Philadelphia on the American Revolution in 2026. We'll see how this partnership evolves, or elsewhere, of course. it seems that Zoom has opened unknown opportunities. Leading to it will be a series of workshops, starting with this event, at the pace, for the moment, of the pace of one a semester. But they can and will surely be complemented by transatlantic seminars and other events. In fact, the essence of the program is to bring together, dare I say, federate, French, European, and American initiatives on the American Revolution leading to the 2026 anniversary. For example, we have a conference planned at the Sorbonne in June 2022, organized by Hugo Tudik, present with us in front of me, and Céline Spector, professor at the Sorbonne. That was not originally part of this program because that's something they organized or they thought and planned on their own, but they have joined us. So that's exactly what I have in mind. And in Munich, we'll meet in July 22, as I mentioned earlier. And then we'll have a workshop in Lyon in fall 2022, organized by Steve and Agnes. And I've heard it's really on the way. A workshop in Turin in spring 2023, organized by Manuela Albertone, and in Toulouse in fall 2024. But other ideas have been a workshop in Nantes and another one in Strasbourg, dates to be decided. These workshops are meant to tackle specific issues and topics. But when the traveling show, shall we say, goes elsewhere in Europe, outside of France, our main objective, to me, is to hear Americanists from the host country and be informed of what topics they write about when considering early and revolutionary America. In other words, I would not want to have a team of French experts traveling through Europe. I mean, I want to hear, Americanists from other countries. I would like to add, before concluding these remarks, that this program is building on previous work and current initiatives. As I mentioned before, we organized at my university in Paris 8 in 2016, a conference on the American Revolution, and an edited volume will come out this November. And in 2019, I co-organized with Mount Vernon a conference in Paris on Franco-American relations, and selected papers from that conference will be published in an issue of Early American Studies. Several of you were present at the Mount Vernon Paris conference and the Paris 8 conferences. Additionally, I'm also co-editing 2 special journal issues on aspects of the American Revolution and continental Europe with several of you as contributors and as co-editors. To conclude, as you can see, this is an ambitious and growing program with partners in various fields, countries, and institutions. And I'm truly delighted to see all this enthusiasm around it. I'm impatient to start working with you, with all of you, until our Paris anniversary conference in 26. I think it's a very rare opportunity to launch a 5-year collaboration like this with a date at the end. And I thank you all very warmly for your enthusiasm, involvement, and presence here or online. So merci beaucoup.
Well, I would like to start by thanking everyone who joined us today, online and in person, students, colleagues, and especially Patrick Sparrow, who comes all the way from Philadelphia to attend this workshop. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to have you here. I also wanted to thank Laurence Territ, whose help was more than welcome in organizing this event, and also Bertrand, with whom I'm happy to work on the America 2026 project. I'm going to give a short introduction with some historiographical context, trying to link together today's presentations in order to provide the non-specialists in our audience, such as students, with a global view of the field. To start with, I believe I can safely say that everyone here agrees that all the political troubles in America in the late 1770s bore indeed a striking resemblance to what we call a revolution, even for us French people. Yet, this major upheaval has been extremely debated among historians. Was the War of Independence truly a revolution? What change did it bring? Was it radical enough? Were the revolutionaries revolutionary enough? Wasn't this simply a war to retrieve ancient privileges? All of the above have been discussed for decades now. 2026 gives up but another occasion to assess the impact of independence and of the revolution in the Atlantic world, starting with France. We cannot deny the truly historic aspect of 1776, and the way historians have treated it only confirms its magnitude. From Tocqueville to Beard and Wood, we can but acknowledge the great span of the historical treatment of the revolutionary years in America. While some have praised in a rather teleological fashion, like McCullough, others tried to depict it as comprehensively as they could, questioning the idea of Republican progress to unveil, well, the resistance to independence, such as Pauline Maier, or the violence of the war, and we can think of Holger Hook on this subject. One must therefore look at the so-called founding fathers' writings with a critical eye, since these men were clever enough to leave us with some ready-to-go narrative about an American success story, leaving behind other actors such as African Americans and women. 2026 thus offers us a new possibility to shed light on the rich discussion still open on the period and decompartmentalize early American history. Today's presentation will tackle the meaning and resonance of independence with Stephen Sarson, the development of an American identity, its display abroad through the New Republic's diplomacy with Francesca Genesio, and the adoption of a federal constitution, which gave the ex-colonies their final political form with Gérard Hug. While the Constitution crystallized an American political essence, uniting all the 13 independent states under one text, it has long been disputed for its counter-revolutionary character. Gérard is undoubtedly the best person here to talk about the coup d'etat, and more recently, Michael Klarman published The Framers' Coup along the same lines. Whatever the flaws in or the polemical aspects of its narrative, the American Revolution was undeniably a political success. From France, it made it look possible for men to prevail over tyranny, to fight for one's liberties, and to get them back, with or without a king. Theoretically and in practice, revolutions presuppose the use of violence to free people from oppression. They imply a new start politically and socially. The word revolution was first used in modern European and Western history by the British to signify a return to a pre-established order and not to describe, for instance, Cromwell's rise to power. Revolution was understood then as restoration, and it made sense because people at the time were not that far from Copernicus and his astronomical work and theories. The same rhetorical arguments were thus brandished against the British in the American colonies. After the Stamp Act crisis and the Townshend Act, the British Americans wanted to recover their rights to trade unencumbered by the taxes imposed by Britain and to restore their political liberty, violated by the interventions of the British Parliament. This fight for liberty, added to the defense of locally vested economic interests, resulted in the birth of 13 independent states. Whatever the degree of moderation we attach to the American Revolution, it is hard, nevertheless, to deny that in 1787, the Founding Fathers did not totally transform the political structure previously known to the colonies when they drafted a federal constitution. Even if the new text didn't entirely erase the political affiliation with the British colonial system, it far exceeded the plain revolt. While we want to set aside, as Bertrand said, the predominant comparison between the American and the French revolutions, I'd like to take the opportunity of being in X for this first event to assess the echo of the American Revolution after 1789. I said in jest at the beginning of this talk that we agreed on the revolutionary character of the American Revolution. And it is true that after the French Revolution, some French, but even some American historians regarded 1776 through the prism of 1789. Hannah Arendt is one of the most prominent thinkers of revolutions in general. And I'd like to assess the revolutionary character and repercussions of American independence in light to what she wrote about the French and the American revolutions. First, she underlined the founding fathers' realism and their implementation of what she calls the political sciences, that is to say, the ancient knowledge acquired since antiquity on politics. And she points out at their inclination to design a government that would fit into an enlightened Republican tradition. In 1787, not only would the delegates of the Philadelphia Convention strive for the preservation of civil liberties and the improvement of their commercial system, but they also worked together to ensure stable institutions in which the political power of the Americans would be vested more effectively. And to do so, the delegates of the Constitutional Convention predominantly adopted the principles of Montesquieu's doctrines of separation of powers. Arendt, who notably focused on the differences between the American and French revolutions, showed how Montesquieu's ideas were not as popular in France as they were in America when both had to work on a constitution. To her, the Americans were fascinated by Montesquieu, just as the French were by Rousseau. And here, it's worth remembering that the British had already implemented a mixed constitution which balanced their monarchical system. We are well aware that Americans did manage to found a new political body stable enough to survive through time and crisis, contrary to the French. However, to Arendt, and I'm quoting her here, it was the French and not the American Revolution that set the world on fire. And it was consequently from the course of the French Revolution and not from the course of events in America or from the acts of the founding fathers that our present use of the word revolution received its connotations and overtones everywhere, the United States not excluded. And she goes on writing, the sad truth of the matter is that the French Revolution, which ended in disaster, has made world history, while the American Revolution, so triumphantly successful, has remained an event of little more than local importance. What is particularly striking in these quotations is how the word revolution is actually associated to disasters and catastrophes and cannot be synonymous with success or even a smooth transition, which it wasn't, but apparently a revolution has to include, in addition to the political overhauling, extreme turmoil. Arendt also disputed the magnitude of the American Revolution, which boiled down to some local matter. She built up this argument by explaining that because of its success, American revolutionaries didn't give rise to a lasting political thought and lost interest in political sciences and theories after 87. Again, I'd like to quote it here. Since nothing even remotely comparable in quality on the level of thought resulted from the course of the American Revolution as opposed to France, revolutions had definitely come under the sway of the French Revolution. So, has the American Revolution been ignored and dismissed? Surely Arendt acknowledged that there was an American influence over the French Revolution, but she was far from the sister revolution paradigm, as she established that it was the discovery and the settlement of America that pushed for the French Revolution, not the events of the 70s or the 80s. And why, we can wonder. Because to her, men who emigrated and lived in America were said to be free and squalor did not exist. And it was that utopia and the birth of a new American man which stimulated the Rousseauian ideals of the French. To reflect upon the spirit and the legacy of the revolution, I'd like to focus to finish this presentation on one particular text. In 1901, President Woodrow Wilson delivered an address for the 125th anniversary of the Battle of Trenton. Through a unifying recollection of history, Wilson seized the opportunity in his speech to defend the American identity and the values of the Republic. 60 years before Arendt, Wilson proudly asserted, "We look back to the great men who made our government as to a generation not of revolutionists, but of statesmen. They fought not to pull down, but to preserve. The revolutionists stood for no revolution at all, but for the maintenance of accepted practices, for the inviolable understandings of precedent, in brief, for constitutional government." Clearly, 19th, 20th century French historiography would tend to agree with Wilson. He obviously took pride here in not calling the war a revolution, and he presented it as a righteous political accomplishment and a beacon, nevertheless, of progress for all men. Again, another quotation here. "In our struggle for independence, we struck a blow for all the world. Some men saw it then. All men see it now." To him, the magnitude of the not revolution is undeniable, especially in hindsight, which is very interesting. Of course, Wilson compared the American and the French Revolution, and here's what he had to say about it. "Have they then forgot that tragic contrast upon which the world gazed in the days when our Washington was president on the one side of the sea in America, an ordered government, a people busy with the tasks of mart and home, a group of commonwealth bound together by strong cords of their own weaving, institutions sealed and confirmed by debate and the suffrages of free men, but not by the pouring out of blood in civil strife. On the other, in France, a nation frenzied, distempered, sinking it knew not what, a nation which poured its best blood out in vain sacrifice, which cried for liberty and self-government until the heavens rang, and yet ran straight and swift to anarchy, to give itself at last with an almost glad relief to the masterful tyranny of a soldier." His portrayal of the French Revolution is quite unoriginal, actually. But what is interesting is how Wilson perpetuates the mythology of the assembly of demigods. And just like Arendt, Wilson regards the French Revolution as a disaster. But contrary to the historian, he clearly refuses to acknowledge its greater influence whatsoever. All in all, Wilson's interpretation of the American Revolution's legacy is best represented by stability and prosperity. But when we think of Jefferson, we might say otherwise and see the legacy of the American Revolution as an impulse for perpetual resistance and confrontation. In the same speech, Wilson wondered, where is that point of principle at which we should wish to make our stand and take the final risk of revolution? Well, Jefferson famously recognized the right, even the duty, to rebel against an unfair government and the importance of allowing people to question authority. When a founder such as Jefferson saw the blood spilled in the American and in the French revolutions as necessary, it is subsequently natural to wonder what to think today of the occasional moments of rebellion we witnessed in the USA. Are they the heirs of the spirit of 1776? Protesters are often described by their opponents as un-American, whether they're from Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, or more recently, the Capitol attack. It might be an unsolvable question. I would like to conclude with one last quotation from Wilson's speech, which I find quite relevant for today's workshop. How do we think of its principle, that is to say, the revolution, and of its example? Do they seem remote and of a time not our own? Or do they still seem stuff of our thinking, principles near and intimate, and woven into the very texture of our institutions? What say we now of liberty and of self-government, its embodiment? What lessons have we read of it on our journey hither to this high point of outlook at the beginning of a new century? Do those old conceptions seem to us now an ideal modified, of altered face, and of a mean not shown in the simple days when the government was formed? Well, I leave these questions for us to ponder. How do we remember the revolution? How do we teach even the revolution? How do we appraise its legacy in today's politics? I hope today will challenge and add to our understanding of the revolutionary period and the intricate questions it raised as regards the perception and practice of Republican ideas in America and their reflection in France. Thank you for your attention.